The Home Secretary is urgently considering whether tougher crossbow laws are needed after 3 women were killed in Hertfordshire.
Yvette Cooper will look at the findings of a previous government review. Let's speak now to the new Security Minister, the Minister of State for Security, Dan Jarvis. Very good morning to you, and thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Jarvis. Can you just bring us up to date with where your government is in relation to the ownership of crossbows?
Yes. Firstly, let me just say how devastated we were at the terrible events that we saw in Bushey yesterday. And my heartfelt condolences go out to the family of the 3 women who have been tragically killed. In terms of activity now, the Home Secretary is looking very carefully at the call for evidence that was initiated by the department a number of months ago. These are clearly very serious and pressing matters, and I know that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, will consider these matters in the round, and she will take a view about how best to proceed. But if a judgment is taken by the Home Secretary that there is a requirement for legislative change, then we will act at pace.
Just looking at the existing legislation, this is the Crossbow Act of 1987, makes it illegal to buy, sell, hire or possess a crossbow if you are under 18. Beyond that age, you do not need a licence to own one, as is required with guns. What do you make of that existing legislation? Does that sound right to you?
I think that is an entirely reasonable challenge, and that is why the Home Secretary acted decisively yesterday to look very carefully at the circumstances not only of what happened yesterday, but what has happened previously. She'll want to look carefully at the evidence that has been presented. We'll want to look very carefully at the legislation that's in place at the moment, and we'll need to come to a conclusion sooner rather than later as to whether the current legislation is appropriate or not. If we decide that it isn't, and I think that you raise a really important point about the ability of people to buy these particular weapons, then we'll need to make changes to the legislation. But we need to do this properly. There needs to be due process. We need to look carefully at the evidence in place and take a view. And I know that the Home Secretary will want to do that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I appreciate the point you're making, which is that there will be a review. But I mean, as you and I sit talking this morning, you'll be aware that it would be possible for someone to buy a crossbow, a very high-powered crossbow, probably on the internet, and have it delivered tomorrow. And there'd be no way of knowing how old that person was or what their intentions were. That's the reality, isn't it, as we speak now?
You're right. That is the reality as we speak now. That is the situation that we've inherited. And that's why the Home Secretary will move at pace, working with her ministerial team and with officials to look at whether the arrangements that are in place at the moment are appropriate or not. I think you do make a really important point. We are looking at this and we will take a view. The Home Secretary takes these matters incredibly seriously. We are mortified about what happened yesterday. We are desperately sad for the family as a result of what happened in Bushey, and we will move at pace, and the Home Secretary will look very carefully not only at what happened yesterday, but more generally other activity, not least that's been detailed in the evidence that the previous government initiated. And we will come to a conclusion sooner rather than later. This is an important matter. It will be a priority for the Home Secretary, and we will move at pace to make a judgment about whether changes to the law need to be made.
Mr. Jarvis, can I also ask you about, we understand tomorrow there is to be an announcement by your government in connection with releasing prisoners early in order to stop jails becoming more full than they already are. You may well tell me that you have to wait until tomorrow, but what guarantees can you give people that dangerous prisoners will not be amongst those who are released early?
Well, I know that my colleague, the Minister, the Secretary of State for Justice, will be looking very carefully at this, and there's been mounting concerns about the nature of the prison population for some time now. We've inherited a very challenging situation, and difficult decisions will have to be made, but I know that Shabana Mahmood will be looking very carefully at this. But in terms of your specific challenge around public safety, As the Minister for Security, there is nothing more than ensuring the safety of the public, and therefore we will be working very closely with our colleagues in the Ministry of Justice to make sure that any decisions that are taken, I don't know what they're going to be yet, they will be announced in due course by the Secretary of State for Justice, but we will ensure that any decisions that are taken, above all else, will prioritise the safety of the public. That is our overriding duty. That is the thing that we take most seriously above all else, to ensure that the public will be kept safe. And that will be our overriding priority with regard to any decisions that are taken about the release of prisoners.
I'm just looking at some of the comments from the new Prime Minister, who is, of course, attending the NATO summit at the moment. One of the phrases he used was the UK is facing multiple threats at home and abroad. Can you give us a sense of what your understanding of, in practical terms, what does that mean for people who hear him say that and wonder what he means? Possibly, in a way, I suppose the international threats are the ones are most clearly obvious. Beyond that, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Prime Minister is making a statement of truth, that the nature of the threats that we face are probably more difficult, probably more challenging, probably more dangerous than at any point since the end of the Second World War, both in terms of the international context, but also in terms of the pressures that we face domestically here at home. The first duty of any government will be national security. And that's why, as the Security Minister, I'm working incredibly closely with Home Secretary, with colleagues in the Ministry of Defence and across government to make sure that we keep the public safe. That is a difficult, complicated job. It requires resourcing. It's precisely why the Prime Minister has already committed that at the very near future, there will be a review of our armed forces. Our armed forces, of course, now are smaller, certainly in the context of the army, than at any point since the Napoleonic War. So the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, John Healey, have committed to a process of review. That will be initiated very soon. But we need to look at these things in the round. We need to understand the complex nature of the threat that we face in our country, and we need to make sure that we've got the resources in place to deal with that threat. I have to say, a few days into the job, I've been incredibly impressed with those people who serve in national security, those members of the police and other agencies across government who work tirelessly to keep the public safe. We owe them a debt of gratitude, and it is an honour and a privilege to be working alongside them to make sure that we defend our country and that we keep the public safe.
Dan Jarvis, we appreciate your time this morning. Dan Jarvis, who is the Minister for Security. Thank you very much.
Thank you.